Once upon a time, there was a king who ruled his kingdom. He worked hard to make sure his people lived happily. His most trusted advisor was his minister, Louis. Louis had a cousin named Charlie, who lived in a village near the capital. As children, they spent their days playing together. But as they grew up, Louis became a minister and moved to the capital, while Charlie stayed in the village, working on his fields. He was a wealthy man, but he was extremely miserly. He was now married to Elizabeth, and they had 2 children, Julie and Mike. Even though Charlie had plenty of money, he didn't spend it, not even for his own family. The villagers whispered among themselves about how Charlie's family looked poor despite his wealth. His children wore the same worn-out clothes over and over again, and their meals were always simple and scarce. One evening, Louis sat with his wife, sipping tea.
"You won't believe what Charlie did once,"
Louis said with a smile.
"Once, when we were kids, he found a torn kite on the street. Instead of buying a new one, he patched it with paper and glue. He used old chewing gum to stick the thread."
His wife laughed so hard.
Oh no.
One morning, Elizabeth woke up and went into the kitchen. She saw Charlie sitting there. She sighed.
Oh no. Charlie, why don't you go out in the lawn and enjoy the fresh air?
She suggested gently. Charlie shook his head.
No. I'm fine here.
Elizabeth barely managed to smile. She filled the kettle with water and placed it on the stove. She lit the fire, then added 3 spoonfuls of tea leaves, and was about to add a 4th.
That's enough, dear,
Charlie said quickly. She stopped, holding back a sigh, and picked up the milk jug. But before she could pour, Charlie said,
Wait! Let me see first.
She turned the jug toward him. He squinted at it, then suddenly exclaimed,
Oh no! That's too much. Just take 1/4 of a cup.
Elizabeth nodded and added 1/4 milk. Then she picked up the sugar jar.
How much?
She asked.
3 teaspoons.
Charlie replied. She frowned.
But the kids don't like less sweet tea.
That's it,
He said. She prepared breakfast and placed it on the table. Just then Julie and Mike came in. They sat down and started eating. As soon as Mike raised his hand for a 3rd toast, Charlie immediately said.
No need to take more. You will feel sleepy in class.
Julie, still chewing the last bite of her second toast. She wanted another but stopped. Both glanced at Elizabeth, but she lowered her head. They grabbed their school bags silently. Mike glanced at Julie and signaled her. She shook her head, but he insisted with his eyes. Taking a deep breath, Julie asked,
Dad, can we have some pocket money?
Charlie didn't even look up.
Elizabeth packed toast in your lunch boxes.
Julie sighed.
But Dad,
You know I don't give pocket money.
Charlie interrupted.
You might eat something unhealthy.
Julie lowered her head and nodded. Elizabeth handed them their lunch boxes. Without another word, they took them and headed to school. As they were going to school, Julie glanced at Mike.
you knew Dad wouldn't give us any money.
Mike kept his head down.
I just thought. Maybe this time you would say yes.
Julie sighed.
That will never happen. I feel we will always stay hungry.
Mike said.
No. Julie. One day, Dad will realize he is wrong.
Julie shook her head.
I don't think so.
One evening, the king called the minister to the palace. Charles reached the palace.
I want you to visit the nearby villages and report on their health conditions.
The king said. Charles nodded. That night, he told his wife.
I have to visit the villages. I thought I would start with my cousin's village.
Catherine frowned.
But Brother Charlie is so miser. I don't think he will be happy.
Charles smiled.
Don't worry. This is an official visit. The villagers will take care of my meals.
Catherine said.
All right then.
The next morning, after breakfast, Charles set out for the village. By nightfall, he reached there, exhausted and starving. Standing at Charlie's gate, he took a deep breath and knocked. Charlie opened the door and froze.
Oh no. Now I have to feed him.
But forcing a smile, he said.
Welcome. My friend.
And led Charles inside. Elizabeth, Kate, and Julie greeted him warmly. Elizabeth went straight to the kitchen, and the kids followed her. She was taking out food when Charlie came in.
What are you doing?
He asked. Elizabeth sighed.
Brother Charles is starving.
Charlie shook his head.
I know. But he should drink something. If he eats too much, he will fall asleep right away. That's not right for his health.
He grabbed a glass, poured in half milk, then filled the rest with warm water. Mike protested.
That's not enough.
Elizabeth clenched her fists.
Charlie. He has traveled all day. He needs a proper meal.
Charlie crossed his arms.
I said no.
Julie frowned.
But, Dad.
No buts.
Charlie snapped. Elizabeth took a deep breath.
At least let me give him some bread.
Charlie cut her off.
That's enough.
Mike and Julie exchanged helpless glances. With a heavy heart, Elizabeth stepped back. Charlie handed the glass to Charles.
Drink this. It's good before sleep. Heavy food can harm you.
Charles forced a smile and took the glass.
Thanks.
He said, then drank it. He set the empty glass down. His stomach still aching. Julie clenched her fists. Mike bit his lip. After showing Charles to a room, Charlie returned to his own. Charles lay on the bed. His stomach ached with hunger. He thought,
The villagers would have fed me. If I stay alive till morning.
Elizabeth lay beside Charlie, staring at the ceiling.
How will brother spend the night like this?
Slowly, she sat up. Just as she was about to get up, Charlie asked.
Where are you going?
Elizabeth replied.
Can I drink some water?
Charlie yawned.
Of course.
She went straight to the kitchen. Meanwhile, Mike and Julie were also wide awake. Mike sat up suddenly.
Let's do something.
They went to the kitchen. They found Elizabeth setting up a tray with food.
Mom.
Mike whispered. She gave the tray and said,
Please take this to your uncle. But knock slowly.
Mike nodded. Mike and Julie carried the tray to Charles's room. Mike knocked softly. Charles heard a soft knock. He opened the door immediately. Mike handed him the tray.
Take this. Uncle.
Charles took the tray, and they left quietly. The next morning, after a simple breakfast, Charles set out to visit the village. Charlie went with him. By afternoon, villagers brought 2 glasses of sweet yogurt smoothies. They handed one to Charles, and were about to give the other to Charlie when Charles spoke.
Charlie just needs water. Heavy drinks aren't good for health.
The villager smiled secretly and took the glass back. Charlie couldn't say a word. At lunchtime, the villagers set up a meal under a shed. Charles sat down and said politely,
Charlie, you can go home for lunch. Lunch should be simple for good health.
Charlie clenched his jaw but nodded and left. At home, he told Elizabeth everything. She and the kids tried to hide their smiles. 2 days later, Charles left. That evening, Mike handed Charlie a wristwatch from Charles. Charlie held it, feeling a pang of guilt.
I only thought about saving food, but I lost a friend.
He said,
Elizabeth. Kids. I'm sorry. I kept thinking about saving. But from now on, I will think about my relations.
Moral: saving too much can ruin relationships.